Hello, welcome back, Recapped Mystery here. Today, I'm going to explain a thriller film, The Accountant. Watch out and take care. A couple takes their son, Chris, to an autistic institute in the hopes of gaining some insight. They explain that this is due to because Chris's husband is in the army and they must move frequently. The director offers to let him reside there. The husband refuses, stating that Chris does not need to be kept away from the things that irritate him. He must be compelled to deal with them since that is how the world operates. Chris repeats nursery rhymes to himself while working on a puzzle in a waiting room. He gets down to the last piece but can't find it and begins to cry. He calms down as a little girl finds the missing piece and delivers it to him. Chris currently works as an accountant. He sits in his office with a couple who is having financial difficulties and educates them on how to file their taxes in order to save the maximum money. They are grateful, and the husband offers to let Chris practice shooting on their land whenever he wants. The director of the United States Treasury, a guy named King, summons an analyst named Medina to his office to speak with her. He applauds her accomplishments and wonders why she hasn't advanced. She claims she enjoys nothing more than being an analyst, but he accuses her of lying. He looks up her arrest records from her youth and tells her that lying on a federal job application is prohibited, and that her record should have stopped her from gaining the job. He tells her that if she wants to keep her job, she must work on a special project for him. He shows her photos of the accountant and all of the crooks he works with. He assists them in keeping track of their unlawful money and has been known to take lives. King informs Medina that if she doesn't figure out who this individual is and solve the case by the end of the month, she would lose her job. Chris returns home and prepares himself dinner. He sets up strobe lights and extreme metal music before going to bed and cruelly massages his shins with a wooden rod. He recalls his mother abandoning their family at Christmas when he was a child. Chris heads to bed after taking his prescription. Later, he returns to his client's farm to practice shooting, and the man is blown away by how skilled Chris is. Chris drives his caravan to his storage facility. Inside, he keeps incredibly expensive items and artworks, as well as various currencies. He also has a big arsenal of weaponry. He rests in his bed and gets a flashback to his time in prison. His cellmate mentored him, teaching him various social skills and preparing him for his job handling money for dangerous criminals. Chris answers his phone when it rings in the middle of the night. A British woman who clearly works for him urges him to pick up some regular clients because she can tell people are becoming suspicious of him. He hesitantly accepts a standard client. He attends a meeting with his new clients, who own a robotics prosthetics firm. One of their in-house accountants discovered that someone within the company is stealing money from their profits, and they want Chris to investigate. Chris accepts the job and promises to start the next morning. Medina glances through her photos and zooms in on one that shows a portion of the accountant's face. She cropped the image and sent it to the face mapping department for study. Brax, a deadly man hired to make businessmen accountable for money laundering, enters a man's car in a Swiss parking garage before he can drive away. He places a gun to his head and demands that he cease shorting other firms' money. Brax has to beat him up, but eventually the man agrees and leaves. Chris enters the conference room where he has been granted permission to work for the corporation and discovers a woman asleep at the conference table. He wakes her up awkwardly, and she apologizes. She identifies herself as Dana, the woman who discovered the missing money in the first place. She gives him an overview of the problem and believes they'll be working together, but Chris expresses his preference for working alone. Chris goes to work after she leaves the meeting room. During a news appearance, Medina receives a call from Homeland Security on the facial recognition request. They've uncovered an audio tape from one of his attacks in which a man begs for his life just before the accountant murders him. They forward the audio file to Medina. Dana sits next to Chris during lunch and attempts to strike up a conversation. Chris does his hardest to socialize, but it's evident that he's not very good at it. Dana discusses her father and how he inspired her to pursue a career in accounting. Chris returns to the conference room and does so much maths on the available whiteboard that he has to continue on the windows. He works his way around the room until he makes a breakthrough. Medina listens to the audio recording repeatedly at home and isolates it using her equipment, the vocals of the accountant. She can hear him repeating a nursery rhyme to himself. Chris proudly displays his findings in the conference room and informs Dana that he has discovered a money leak. Someone is directing funds to a corporation that does not exist. One of the company's shareholders interrupts him and asks Chris for findings, but he tells her that he doesn't have a definite answer yet and that he needs more time before he can reveal who is taking the money. Brax pays a visit to one of the robotics company's shareholders at his home in the middle of the night, telling him to get insulin from the fridge and bring it over to the table, and that he can either inject himself with the insulin and make his death appear to be a suicide so that his wife can collect on his life insurance policy, or he can fight back and Brax will kill both him and his wife. The man makes the decision to inject himself. The next day, as Chris arrives at the conference room, custodians are inside erasing his work off the windows. He begs them to halt, and the firm's owner enters to explain that his best friend, the shareholder, committed suicide last night due to remorse over stealing money from the company, and he asks Chris to cease working on the case. Chris feels disappointed that he was unable to complete what he began. Chris returns home and engages in a hard session of shin-slapping with his wooden rod while listening to heavy metal music and turning on the strobe lights. He gets another flashback of his mother abandoning the family, and he breaks the rod over his shin and tosses his medication bottle. He calms down, takes his medication, and goes to bed. When he leaves the house the next morning, an automobile follows him. Chris returns to his client's property to practice shooting once more. He recalls a childhood conflict with his brother, Brax, and a trainer hired by his father. They are beaten by the trainer and are covered in cuts and bruises. The trainer wants to call it today, but their father insists they haven't had enough. He forces the youngsters to stand and fight. A couple of guys are holding the two clients hostage inside the residence. They demand that the wife go outside and call Chris in so that they can reach him. Chris kills a guy from the yard as he leads her to the front door. The other thug puts the couple into their truck and drives them away from their home. Chris fires at the truck, causing it to come to a halt, and drags the thug from the vehicle. Chris strangles the man with his belt and demands to know for whom he works. The man claims he has no idea who is in control, only that he was commanded to kill Chris and Dana. Chris murders the man and flees the property, making his way to Dana's house. Dana is followed to her apartment complex by a man, and Chris arrives just in time to watch him enter the lift with her. Chris enters the building from the back and climbs the stairs. When Dana arrives at her flat, two delivery men say they have a box for her. They force their way into the apartment and attempt to restrain her, but she fights back and flees to the bathroom. Chris breaks into the flat, murders the two guys, and invites Dana to accompany him. Brax receives word that the accountant has slaughtered his troops. Chris drives Dana to his caravan and instructs her to wait outside while he prepares. She still enters inside and sees all of his money and guns. She confronts him about them, but he is unable to provide direct answers. Language Services contacts Medina about the audio recording she supplied them. They warn her that the man she's seeking for may have been a victim of childhood abuse or may have a neurological issue that causes him to chant the nursery rhyme when he's stressed. Medina goes to the IRS offices and collaborates with an employee to try to cross-reference accountants' aliases with high-income individuals. Chris takes Dana to a posh hotel to hide out, and she interrogates him about his fighting skills. He tells her that his father was in the army and made him train to be able to stand up to bullies. He also informs her that he has autism and that, despite his best efforts, he finds it difficult to socialize. Dana tells him about a dress she really wanted in high school and how she learned to gamble and count cards so she could afford it. She only wore it once, but she wanted to blend in with the other youngsters. Dana moves in to kiss Chris during an emotional moment, but Chris pulls away after learning about the robotics case. He informs her that someone was taking money out of the company only to put it back in and make much more money. Chris later follows Brax along the street, and Brax notices and shoots at him. Chris follows him and ends himself in one of the shareholders' hotel rooms, where he discovers she's been shot dead. Medina works with the IRS employee and discovers the accountant's real name, Chris, and that he works as an accountant at a small firm in a building connected to a bunch of cash businesses that he owns and runs his money through to conceal how much he actually makes. Medina contacts King and informs him that the majority of Chris' earnings are donated to neuroscience organizations. When Chris returns to the motel, he discovers Dana asleep on the couch. He recalls his father urging him and his brother to beat up a gang of students who had bullied him earlier that day at school. Chris believes that keeping Dana involved is too dangerous, so he packs his belongings and departs. King and Medina lead a team of investigators into Chris's home. Noting all of his unusual living practices, they discover that he possesses a large number of firearms without serial numbers as well as a high-tech security system. The owner of the robots company hires Brax to install security cameras in his home in case Chris comes after him. King dismisses the other detectives and stays in the house with Medina to discuss. He wants Medina to tell him about her arrest, and she says she tried to kill a drug dealer who was supplying drugs to her sister, and she doesn't regret her decisions. King tells Medina how long he's been trying to find the accountant and the difficulties he's had to overcome to get this far. He tells her he was at the hotel where Chris's tape was captured and overheard him killing the man. Afterwards, Chris threatened him with a gun and inquired if he was a decent father. When King agreed, Chris allowed him to leave. He saw Chris's decision to spare his life as a sign to quit, and just as he was about to leave his office for good, he received a call from a woman with a British accent with information about an approaching illicit transaction. He chose to continue on the force and use the woman who called as an informant. Chris's cellmate, a federal informant, was interrogated by King after he was imprisoned for assisting criminals with their money. When they finally let him go, the folks he used to work for tracked him down, tortured him, and murdered him. Chris freaked out when one of the guards told him about his cellmate's death and fled the prison. Chris later attended his mother's burial alongside his father, but when they were ordered to leave, he had a nervous breakdown. A security guard shot at Chris, but his father stepped in front of the bullet and was killed. When Medina questions why King is telling her all of this, he explains that he wants Medina to answer the phone for the British woman after he retires in 7 months. Medina answers the phone when Chris's landline rings. The British woman on the opposite end of the queue provides Medina more information about the robotics company. When Chris arrives on the property, Brax is at the firm owner's residence. Brax dispatches some of his men, and Chris murders all but one, whom he keeps to question about the house's layout. Brax monitors the surveillance cameras as he dispatches his guys to Chris and attempts to give them orders on how to bring him down. Chris is injured, but he manages to kill all of the men Brax sends after him and enter the mansion. Brax recognizes Chris as his brother as he examines the security footage and asks his soldiers to stand down. Brax returns to Chris, and the firm owner takes his place in front of the cameras. Brax is first enraged with Chris for not being able to reach him for over 10 years, and he is also outraged that Chris attended their mother's burial. Brax blames Chris for their father's death, and Chris lets Brax attack him to vent his rage. Chris seizes control of the situation and threatens Brax with a gun until he calms down. The two brothers reconcile. The firm owner enters the room, perplexed and irritated that Brax has not taken care of Chris. Chris shoots the firm owner and returns to his conversation with his brother. Before Chris departs, he pledges to meet with Brax in a week to catch up. Another set of parents comes to the neuroscience center for help with their autistic son. Their son enters one of the rooms and encounters Justine, the director's daughter. She was the same little girl who used to help Chris with his puzzle when he was a kid. The director notes that Justine is nonverbal and communicates through a high-tech laptop. When Justine shows how she communicates, the computer emanates the same British woman who works with Chris. Dana returns to her flat to tidy up and receives a delivery. She opens it expecting to find a famous artwork, but upon closer study, she discovers that the exterior canvas is only masking what's on the inside. She tears the outer sheet away, revealing a very expensive picture she recognized from Chris' Caravan. Please subscribe to assist the channel, turn on notification and leave a like. Thank you for taking the time to watch. See you again soon.